Hello, everybody. Welcome to Town Hall here on the eve of President's Weekend, a long weekend. Also, for our those of us teaching and learning aggressively over the course of the quarter, the end of the quarter is nigh. So I know that both Cayla and Naomi have weathered the storm of the quarter. The break approacheth. Cayla, do you get to have fun on break?
I do, but I'm still going to do some work as well. I'm going to spend some time with my family, but I am also hosting a sexual health education fair when I get back. So I'm working on the planning for
Ah.
that.
And where are you and your family going to be?
We're in St. Louis, Missouri.
All right,
Yeah.
great. Now, Naomi, yeah, I know you're an M2, so boards are coming, but
Mhm.
and how are you going to be spending break?
I will mostly be studying, which I know doesn't sound fun, but I'm a little excited. We just
Mhm.
finished our last exam of preclinical, so it's kind of good to finally be at that next step.
Yeah, I see the whiteboard with some stuff on it. Like you're still getting yourself or you're organizing and doing some work already. Um, I have to say, for those of you who haven't had the joy of taking boards, I don't think I've ever been more burned out than I was like a week and a half before I took them. And then, fear kicks in and gets you going again. But all right, so I am delighted to have this panel here. We're talking about Black History Month this week. So we have Eric Williams, who is our Vice President for Community Campus Outreach, Kim Darey, a 2004 graduate of CMS. She is, excuse me, president of Endeavor Health-Elmhurst Hospital and also vice chair of the university's board of trustees. We have Naomi Polo. Oh, I almost had it. Popoolapade, who is an M2, having finished her quarter. Cayla Adams from our physician assistance program. Quentin Conkle, PhD, who is an assistant professor in interprofessional healthcare studies. We're all talking about Black History Month. Um, but first, a little bit of update on the university. This is, as I said, the end of the quarter. For those of us who don't have clinical or other duties over the weekend, it is a long weekend for the university, and I hope people get to have a good time. I cleared 3 months as president just this last week, and I'm starting to move a little bit from trying to just learning to being a little bit more active. So everybody's been involved in the budget. We're having a whole series of budget meetings, including there's one this afternoon. We have historically been dipping into the endowment. That is not a recipe for success for the next few years or the next 50 years. So the board has set as a goal, and I completely endorse a flat budget. It's going to be extra rough this year at some level because our health care costs have gone up $1 million. So that makes a flat budget even harder to get to. But chewing into endowment only takes away our ability to support scholarships and things like that in future years. But that's one of the reasons that fundraising is a core focus of me now. We are working harder and harder, both on talking to donors and potential donors, but also our own internal systems and thinking about what a comprehensive campaign for the university could look like. So we have a board meeting in March. One of the things I'll be talking to the board about is how we do more work in terms of focusing on raising funds. We are well behind historically. We are well behind what our peers would be doing in terms of raising funds and also drawing on endowment and things like that for student scholarships. So within that, one of the things I'm working on is a project called RX Kids, which I worked on in Michigan. We're talking to donors and legislators, and part of that is just having RFU be active in the community and trying to help moms and babies. So, just to be blatant, right, that it involves us having conversations that maybe we don't otherwise get to have. Also, as a side effect, you get to help moms and babies. So RX Kids is a cash allowance program that started in Flint, Michigan. It essentially drove evictions in the first year of life to zero, increased birth weight, decreased NICU admissions, and decreased referrals to Child Protective Services. So Michigan, the state of Michigan has now implemented it in a large way across the state. Pretty soon they'll have a third of all Michigan babies in the program. So that's one of the ways that the university can provide some leadership and talk to donors and do some work. So I'm spending some time on that. One of the things that the university has not done also, the university hasn't been very involved in corporate partnerships and corporate giving. So that's a complicated thing for a university, and certainly it's extra complicated for RFU because we have so little history with it. Lots of universities get their first taste of corporate giving through their athletics and their athletic departments. They're used to having sponsors for athletics that are corporations and things like that. And it does take some getting used to. It is culturally, different for a university to have corporate partners, but that's one of the things that we're thinking about. And then related to that, but another project, I'm working with some students on business student interest in business. This is, one of the things. Kim Darey is president of a huge hospital, right? That is a whole set of work and jobs in addition to being a clinician. I think it's really important that our students have a path to understanding what that involves. So one of the challenges in our current healthcare system is that sometimes clinicians are not at the top or in decision-making areas for these big health systems. And sometimes the decisions are just not made with patients in mind. And it's important that we have clinicians of all stripes who are able to sort of understand what's going on and have an impact. So we're going to start with some easy stuff like speaker series and things like that, but we're also working on how the university can do more with entrepreneurship and opportunities for students to learn more about business. So that's a little bit about how I'm spending some of my time, how my team is doing some work. But one of the great and fun things about a university is that we get to spend time thinking about, well, what makes society change in important ways, and how people contribute to our history, and how that history then turns into improvement, or sometimes sadly not an improvement in our lives. And Black History Month is a way for us to reflect on that, particularly around the lived experiences of African Americans and our Black neighbors and families. The College of CMS, and then by extension, the university, was founded in 1912. And one of the interesting things was it provided opportunity sort of without regard to who you were or where you were from. So they had night classes in particular, so non-traditional students could go to school. There have never been quotas or anything like that, which provided opportunity when other schools did not. One of the first people to exercise the benefit of that was Fannie Emanuel, who was an MD grad in 1915. She is interestingly, and she graduated as a grandmother, which is also probably incredibly rare of the era. So, and there is a scholarship in her honor. That was funded by a variety of people, including Major General Elder Granger, who a physician in the Army and a member of our board. So we have a sort of remarkable history in some ways. Fannie Emanuel being I think our first African American woman grad, and maybe our first African American grad as well. So, and you can see and learn some about that at the Scholl Museum. The students have put together a whole group of history. Actually, of that list, Nathan Hale Williams, who's a surgeon from Bronzeville in Chicago, did the first open heart surgery. My previous institution picked him as inspiration for one of our own houses. but you can learn about a lot of really interesting folk at the exhibits that the students put together. And Eric, this is my segue to having you talk about what we're doing for Black History Month and what we can enjoy and learn. And I know you're going to ask other members of our panel to talk about it a little bit, so I'll just hand the screen over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and this month has been full of events. The month started off with a gallery and trivia showcase, so to speak, at the show gallery, in which you just spoke about, Aaron. And then just this past week, I had the opportunity to to attend a professionals panel. It was a great panel. It had practicing physicians and a physician assistant and a podiatrist. They really just talked about their professions and some of the things that goes along with their professions and how to navigate the profession for aspiring physicians and other healthcare workers. And so that was a very a good event. And coming up next week, there are no events because students are on break next week. But the week after that, there's the Black History Month Showcase. And I'm going to ask Naomi to talk about the Black History Month Showcase, as she is one of the members of the Student National Medical Association, and she was one of the people that helped to organize this event. Naomi?
Yes, so our showcase will be on February 27th, 2026 at 6:30 p.m. It'll be in RWCLC 2.044. So if you go up to Centennial Room, it's a little to the left of that. We will have talents displayed from people in our community here at RFU, including security guards, a few of the students. So it'll be really exciting. Come see your friends, come see the people that you see in the hallway and see what talents they have. We'll also be serving dinner, and there'll be a bunch of raffle prizes for you to win. Very exciting stuff. I'll keep it on the low just so you'll be surprised when you're there, but it'll be a great time. And Dr. Darey will be our keynote speaker. So it's always a great time, and we hope you attend. If you have any talent that you would like to share, feel free to email us, or we will be posting it on our social media. It'll also be sent out to the whole school for opportunities for you to showcase your talent at the talent show. Any and all talents are welcome. So yeah, we look forward to it. We look forward to you joining us.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. And Naomi mentioned the dinner is going to be served tonight, but she didn't say what the dinner is going to be. And I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be either, but it's going to be very good. Okay, extremely good. Okay, so please come out and join us. All right.
I'm sure that people can put questions in the Q&A, and I can imagine that might be a topic for people.
Yep.
Well, we pretend we don't see that question.
Okay, all right. So, Kim, obviously, they asked you to be the keynote speaker, and I know you're still working on what you're going to say, but can you talk a little bit about how you think about Black History Month? Because obviously you're going to have to talk about it. I know you've thought about this before, but how are you thinking about it?
Well, I'll just start out that my journey has I think it's important to understand people's journey because sometimes we look at the end result and say, oh, that person must have had it easy, right? And so part of I'm a storyteller. I like telling stories. I think stories resonate with people. African Americans, because historically, a few hundred years ago, we could not read. We weren't allowed to learn how to read and things like that. So people share their traditions orally, and so I love storytelling. One thing that I do think that when I first started at Endeavor Health or Elmhurst Hospital. I did work in DEI, and it was a great space for us to learn how people in our community how they're affected with healthcare. Understanding how they view healthcare, and by being a clinician, sometimes you can get very clinical and forget about the fact that people have some cultural sensitivities and things like that. And so it really broadened my view of how I looked at patients, how I looked at people, and traditions that I think are very important in order for people to heal. One thing that we pride myself at my hospital is that we try to make our place a place of healing. And a lot of people look at healing in a very different way. Some people look at it as true clinical, medical, that type of thing. But there are a lot of people in different cultures that see healing very differently. They see healing as I have my people around me, even if I'm scared and I'm in pain or whatever, as long as my people are around me, that's important to me. Or some people use religion as a way to heal. And so there's so many different ways and traditions that people need to get through their healthcare experiences. And so some of that is part of the journey that I learned myself, and just not taken for granted that even if I am African American, does not mean that I know everything about it, and it doesn't mean that I'm always going to be sensitive to someone else or even someone that looks like me. And so it is a constant thing that you always have to make sure that you're checking yourself and making sure that you are not going into those stereotypes and those types of things, because it does happen. And so it's a journey that I think it never ends. And I think we can learn and share a lot of those the tools that we learned how to deal with people and work with people. It doesn't matter if you're in clinical or not. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, um, treating people with respect, kindness, those are things that are across every culture, and those are the things that we need to kind of bring back, especially to the bedside and to people, because there is a fear of healthcare for a lot of people in a lot of different cultures.
Yeah, that's so true. Eric, I mean, you've put obviously a real thought into creating programming for a Black History Month. I don't know if there's more that you wanted to say about that, but then also maybe just, your thoughts of how an institution or how we should be thinking about Black History Month.
Well, at first I want to say our office supported the students in Black History Month, and they did the bulk of the programming. Despite their busy schedules, they were able to do most of the
Hmm.
programming for that. We did some logistical work with them, but for the most part, it was the students. Now, for me, as far as Black History Month, I'm from the South. I'm from Virginia. And as a
Hmm.
matter of fact, the city I grew up in, Petersburg, was about 20 minutes from Richmond, which was at one point the capital of the
The
Confederate.
capital of the Confederacy.
All
Yeah.
right. And so that's what you were reminded of all the time. Okay. The
Hmm.
school that I went to was called AP Hill.
Yeah.
General AP Hill was a Confederate general. All right.
Mm.
And so we were always reminded of the Confederacy. Matter of fact, we had, uh, the one of the holidays was in honor, and we actually got out of school on honor of Robert E. Lee. Okay, and those things. Okay, and this was before the King, way before the King holiday. Okay,
Hmm.
and so those are the things that you were reminded of all the time. But for me, when you talk about Black History Month, I was very, very fortunate and that my parents recognized, where we were growing up. And so they provided us with these Black History Month, or excuse me, Black History encyclopedias. All
Oh,
right. They were
wow.
produced by Ebony,
Wow.
Ebony Magazine,
Yeah,
which
or
is,
the magazine.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. And so, but they had this series of encyclopedias, and I read those all the time.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and so I became very interested in Black history. As a matter of fact, my undergraduate degree is in African American Studies. Okay, so
Is
kind of the
there
history and the social
yeah.
piece of it. Yeah. Mhm.
Is there a story or something you remember reading out of those that really has stuck with you?
Well, I read a lot, okay, on the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
I did a
Yeah.
lot of reading on that. But also, what really stuck with me is the things that they didn't teach us in school, like who
Hmm.
invented what,
Yeah.
the contributions that African Americans made. Okay, and so those things are the things that stuck with us because we heard about inventors and developers who were white, but you never heard
Hmm.
about those who were African American. You go things such as the stoplight. Okay, and
Hmm.
the design of Washington D.C. Virginia is right outside of Washington D.C. Okay, so we used to go to Washington D.C. all the time, but I never knew that it was actually designed by an African American. All right, and things
Hmm.
like that, and so and those things stuck with me. But also the change that has happened in this nation, a lot of that was pushed by African Americans. Okay,
Hmm.
we know about the civil rights movement. We know a lot about the civil rights movement, but there are other things that have changed as well because of the civil rights movement, and so and a lot of that is missing, and I think this is extremely important now because of the pushbacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the pushbacks on what some people have defined as critical race theory, but in actuality,
Hmm.
what they're talking about is Black history. Because critical race theory is a whole different category there. But the pushback on Black history, the contributions of African Americans and others who have made those contributions, but it's not being recognized anymore. And so, it's up to us to continue that recognition. And so, I want to make sure those things are included in there. Aaron, you talked about the contributions of African Americans in this display, the gallery downstairs.
Hmm.
And so those things need to be heard to get the respect because you're not going to see that on TV. You're not going to see that in the mainstream periodicals and newspapers. Okay, and so that those types of things need to be seen, and it's up to us to be able to push those things.
Yeah, I came from a household. My grandfather was a migrant worker in California and worked in the shipyards, and Azorean folk are some combination of escaped slaves and Jews kicked out of Portugal and Spain during the Spanish Inquisition. And but it was also a union household. And one of the stories I grew up with about the Pullman strike at the turn of the last century. And many of the Pullman workers were African Americans. They were a large part of the Great Migration up to Chicago from the South. And the strike was incredibly important to the union movement. It was one of the most active. It was also violently put down by the military. And in Chicago, those troops were stationed at Fort Sheridan, um, just down the road from us. And so yeah, there are so many intersections, right? Like so many of our lives are intersections of identity. Um, and uh, and those pieces of history are easy to not remember when they're important. So we have a couple of questions, and I'm going to go to the rest of the panel with some sort of version of what I just, like what do you think is important and for us to remember, or what do you particularly take from Black History Month? Pamela Chambers says, not a question, but a comment. I had those encyclopedias as well. What struck with me was George Washington Carver and his research on peanuts. And he made thousands of patents that help us to this day. I actually thought about that today when I had my freshly ground peanut butter sandwich, which is what I eat every day. And then she also says, Banneker and his civil engineering in Washington, D.C., you never hear about it in mainstream history lessons today. And those roundabouts are rough, though. I will say that. Not his fault necessarily, but so Cayla, Quentin, and Naomi, uh, Kim and Eric both had a chance to talk a little bit about what they take from this month and that history. What do you guys hang on to?
I can go. Uh,
Yeah.
so, so Black history is like probably one of my favorite subjects, and
Hmm.
Black history means a lot to me because when I was a child, my mother used to take me and my brother to all these local events that they used to have around Lake County during Black History Month, and so there'd be different speakers, different programming, and that kind of instilled in me, to appreciate my Black American ancestry. And also, my grandmother, she grew up in the Jim Crow South of Mississippi,
Hmm.
and she would always tell the stories about the things they had to deal with and how they were treated during the South. So that also made me appreciate my history and what my people have overcome and all their perseverance and the challenges they faced. And one thing now, I like Black History Month, and I'm glad there's a month that focuses on Black history, and you can find programming and different events, and the focus is on Black history. But I feel like by putting it in one month, it kind of makes it secondary to
Yeah,
American
that's
history,
fair.
when in
Yeah.
reality, uh, Black American history is American history and should always
Mhm.
be celebrated because Black Americans have contributed so much to the foundation of this nation.
Right.
But so that's my take on it. That's why I kind of love this time of year.
So there are a few events that just to remind people of. The DuSable Black History Museum and Education Center has a Paris in Black exhibit. The Griffin Museum of Science and Industry has its annual exhibit on Black creativity and juried art exhibition. The Chicago History Museum has something on the life of Emmett Till, and then the Waukegan History Museum, the Carnegie, has exhibits as well. So Cayla, Naomi, you guys want to tackle that question?
Yeah, I'll go. I feel like the common trend that we're hearing is that Black history seems to be put on the back burner. People don't feel like they've gotten the opportunity to learn the full extent of it, which I do think is very accurate. Everything that I learned in school, especially before going to an HBCU, was just like, oh, well, they were the Black Panthers,
Hmm.
they're bad. And like we learned about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, but that was it. There was nothing more past that, and like Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King. But Black history is extremely extensive, and there's so much
Hmm.
that we can learn from it, especially in healthcare, because there's been so many studies, so many disciplines that have been built off of Black bodies. In particular, I have a very strong passion for maternal health care. The Black maternal
Hmm.
mortality rate in the US is 3 to 4 times more likely than any other demographic, but Black bodies were the ones that were tested on first to build the discipline. So there's a lot of discrepancies in healthcare. The biggest thing that I think we can all take away as clinicians and as people in general, you need to educate yourself on all matters. And Black history is one of those ones in our country, and just any type of tradition and culture. You need to take the time out of your day to start learning about them on your own to see where the truth lies.
That's great. Naomi.
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said already. I really love Black history because it's a time for us to kind of acknowledge where we've come from and what we've contributed. And it's a time for unity as well, in terms of um, all coming together and acknowledging the greatness that has kind of been bestowed before us, and
Mhm.
um, like a light towards the future as well. And I think, especially as we all work in health or are working towards working in health, being able to acknowledge the advancements, I think helps inspire us for how we can advance the future as well, and be there for our patients in ways that not only help them physically, but also pour into them, like encouraging them. I think the emotional and mental aspect of medicine is also really important. So being able to speak life into your patients as well. If you acknowledge all the contributions that we as Black people have contributed, and kind of so our potential, being able to acknowledge that and internalize that, I think would help us to also bring that back to our patients as well. So I love Black history because I love seeing all the ways that we've we've contributed, and it inspires me to want to make advancements in the future as well.
So you get the SNMA in particular spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to do programming wise for Black History Month. Can you just talk a little bit about how the students, what those conversations were like, how you guys decided what to do, things like that?
Yeah, so we actually start Black History Month planning really early. It's definitely one of our star events of the
Hmm.
entire school year. Um, I think especially now, we kind of speak what's been on our hearts and kind of what's been on our minds, even early in the
Hmm.
school year, and kind of have that um, shape the programming going forward. Something I really loved that we did this year was our Black professionals panel was based off of the conversations that are typically had in barbershops and salons.
Hmm.
Just having that safe space, I think that's something that we've kind of all spoken about, and being able to see that come to life, especially after months of planning. I think that's kind of what goes into it. We always have a different theme every year, but it's always centered on the safe space that we can create and acknowledging that, like, because how many cultures, I don't know, but like how many cultures actually like go to hair salons and that's a time where you can have the best conversation with somebody you only see once a month. But even your hair is such an intimate experience. So I think that's something that's so unique to the Black community. And so I love that we were able to kind of make that known. And it's something that we can all relate to, even though we all come from different cultures as well. So,
Aaron,
I'm sure. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
well, I just want to, piggyback on something that Naomi said about the barbershop, and the beauty
Hmm.
salons. You know, when I moved here from Madison, Wisconsin, and there were barbershops in Madison in which, on a weekly basis, they would have healthcare professionals to come into the
Yeah.
barbershop. And they will perform, do certain screenings, but also just health
Yeah.
education, things like that, because of the importance of the barbershop and people going
Hmm.
into the barbershop. And that's where a lot of people in the African American community will get their news
Yeah.
and gossip. But also
Hmm.
that help as well. And so the importance of the Black barbershop and the beauty salon in the Black community in receiving information. And I'm so happy that the SNMA took that focus on and modeled this after the Black barbershop and beauty salon.
So I'm going to ask you each maybe to think a little bit about a piece of Black history that maybe you think people don't know, um, or that surprised you, or something that you feel like has, um, I don't know, interest or something like that. And so I'll start a little bit. I'm going to talk about Idlewild, Michigan. So Idlewild is just south of Interlaken. It's sort of right about there. It's on a lake. And it was, sort of still is, a vacation community for African Americans. So there used to be the Green Book, right, which was a catalog of places that, especially during segregation, were thought to be safe or welcoming to Black Americans as they traveled around the country. And so finding a place for a vacation wasn't so straightforward necessarily. And Idlewild was a place where particularly professional African Americans would go. So Fannie Emanuel, one of the namesake of our house, an early grad, she and her husband had a place in Idlewild. Daniel Hill Williams, who, as I said, the first person to do open heart surgery, who was also a Chicagoan, and in Bronzeville, had a place in Idlewild. And actually, the professional class of African Americans in Chicago, a lot of them went to Idlewild, and it was a remarkable community of of places where professional African Americans would go and vacation and see each other. It still exists in some ways. It's not as much, it's not what it once was, but I think that often we don't think about the variety of different kinds of experiences that people had. And for folks who had education or leadership, there were places like that. So anyway, Idlewild is a place that almost nobody talks about. But when I learned about it and learned that it existed and got to drive through it and find all the common ways that some of those people would see each other, it was a community that was kind of important for um, communication between some of those folks. Anyway, that's going to be my little piece of Black history that I don't think very many people know. Anybody else want to talk about one that maybe folks don't know?
Uh, I can talk about one. I have two. I actually wrote down two of them, but I'm going to talk
Hmm.
about one. If we have some time at the end, I might come back in and talk about the other one.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about Brown v. Board of Education. That was
Okay.
the landmark Supreme Court case that desegregated our schools and
Hmm.
colleges. I don't think a lot of people know that there were school systems that shut down because of the Brown v. Board, instead of integrating those schools. And they decided to just go ahead and shut down the whole school systems. And the thing about that is you would think, well, if they shut down the schools, all the kids in that particular school system, were left out of school. No.
Hmm.
Okay, only the African American students were left out of education, and some of them had to move away from those towns because of that, and some just they were never able to complete their education because of the closing of the schools. For the white students, though, they set up these academies. Okay, and so and those academies, those students, they were basically private schools, but
Hmm.
donors pay for those students to go there, but Black students could not go. Like I said before, I'm from Virginia. I worked in a place called Farmville, Virginia, which is in Prince Edward County, Virginia, and the school system and there actually shut down. And that was the Moton School in Prince Edward County, that was actually part of the Brown v. Board of Education case. And so those students went to those schools, like the Amelia Academy and other schools like that. But some of the Black students actually came to my hometown of Petersburg, and was actually able to complete their education in
School
Petersburg.
there.
Some went to Richmond and things like that. Okay, because our schools stayed open. We actually had a Black high school called Peabody High School, and we had that was the Black high school in Petersburg. So there was Petersburg High and Peabody High School. Okay, my dad actually taught at Peabody High School, and so but some of those students came there. But like I said, the others were not able to complete their education. So it's kind of called the lost generation of students
Interesting.
there. Mhm.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
I,
Kim.
I just want to share the about something that really just resonates with me. But one thing I've always really held close to me is the Black church,
Hmm.
and how the Black church it's a whole community. It is so much more than just going to church on Sunday. For those serious churchgoers, we know, especially previous generations, you're in church all day. I mean, Sunday was like an all day thing. Like but no, nothing else was planned. Okay, like you were there all day. But it was a time where we felt safe in that house,
Hmm.
regardless of what was going on outside of the world. We all came together in that house, in God's house, and we celebrated. We cried together. We danced together, and more importantly, children were raised there. Like that's how where you learned a lot of principles. You learned a lot of wisdom in that church, and everyone, regardless, everybody got fed. No one's
Hmm.
leaving out there with an empty stomach. And so, and I don't even know how some of these small churches um, came up with the money to feed everybody, but it's sort of like a biblical story, right? Of loaves and fishes, right? Like how did the poor community and the amount of food that comes out of there, it's just always it's such a beautiful community, and it's something that I think I grew up with. Many people grew up with. Our definitely people from our families have grown up like that. When I think about how it really shaped not only the civil rights time, but even now, people come together and really share their experiences and share, how they're going to get through, because that's part of it. Is how do we cope? How can we be resilient in a world that may not look at us as being fully human, or that
Hmm.
we don't deserve the things that we have, and that we are treated a certain way. But in that house, it's a different place. You feel safe, and you know that everyone there has your back, And it's a beautiful story. I know that we've had a lot of, Tyler Perry, people like that have, made shows and movies about the Black church, but truly the experience of being there, the music alone is enough to really resonate to people and give them the strength to get through the week. And then if you were really a churchgoer, Sunday was not the only day you were there. You were there for choir rehearsal and Bible class and this and that and all those types of things. But I love the Black church, and I think it's something unique, and it really brought our community together.
Great. Great.
To piggyback off of that, as far as the church goes, it's so interesting when you come from an environment where you get to experience the love and the culture of being around so many other Black people. And I would like to congratulate Roslyn for what they've done. You guys are doing very well at bringing in a diverse demographic into healthcare, which not a lot of places can attest to. And we're creating safe spaces, and Dr. Williams and people like Naomi, we're making sure that there are places for students of color to be and to interact. That's not something that's normally accepted across the board. So it's so lovely to be at a school that cares and that's very open about the history, and it's giving us a platform to talk about it. Because also part of our whole experience is also preparing ourselves to be in a climate where we may be one of the only ones. So you may be one of the only Black people, and understanding like you have to know how to work in a space where people may look at you differently. People may say, oh, you only got here because they needed to reach a quota. And it's like, no, I got here because I did a lot of work and I care about the people around me and I want to take care of everyone. So I just want to thank the university and our community, because you guys have done a phenomenal job at that.
No, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. Particularly in an era like this where that there's it takes a position to actually do that.
So one Black history thing that I learned about recently that I never knew growing up was about an event called or a place called the Devil's Punch Bowl, and it's in I believe it's in Natchez, Mississippi. And what it was, I guess it was like a ravine, and the Union Army like built this as an encampment for escaped or for like escaped slaves. They can go and seek shelter, but the conditions were so bad, and so there was disease and there wasn't clean water and
Yeah.
things like that. And so when the when they died, they just left the bodies and buried them where they were at. And so I don't know, that's why it got the name the Devil's Punch Bowl.
Devil's Punch Bowl. Wow.
So now that's so I think it's still there. So I don't know if it's like a mass
Wow.
grave site or whatever, but yeah, so that was some obscure history that I didn't know about.
Yeah. Naomi, something that you've learned in Black history or something that you think maybe people don't know?
So this might be cheating, I don't know, but I feel like we're in the midst of history right now, with the kind of acceptance of different backgrounds within Black history. I'm half Ghanaian and half Nigerian, and so being able to see kind of African influences in music, even now, is something that's really important to me, especially as somebody who is first generation but grew up in a Black community. I relate to both experiences, and I check both boxes on the form. So being able to see my cultures combine, I think we're in the middle of history, and I'm so happy that children will be able to grow up and kind of experience both sides, whether they're Black American or first generation. They'll be able to accept both sides and kind of learn from both sides as well, and be proud of all of it. So I think we're in the middle of history right now.
Great. So we have some questions or comments. Kenyatta Cross says, years ago, I applied to graduate school at the University of Arkansas Research and Training Center in Deafness. I had the privilege of interviewing with Dr. Glenn Anderson, the first Black deaf person to earn a PhD in the United States. He's a trailblazer and an amazing advocate for the Black community, particularly the Black deaf community. And intersectionality is such a thing, right? I mean, like it is, such an important part of how people experience their lives, which means how they experience race, but also disability or other minoritized statuses. And so that's a great little piece, Kenyatta. So then Lisa Hop I wonder if the panelists have read about the Black Angels, so named by their patients, Black nurses who were recruited from the South to care for long-term TB patients at Seaview Sanitarium, so which was no doubt for tuberculosis. White nurses, fearful of TB's contagion, fled. They were erased. I presume the Angels is who she means, were erased from history, though they made major contributions to finding a cure for TB. These patients were poor and forgotten. A book by Maria Simolos chronicles their story and brings their story back where it belongs. I highly recommend the read. So one of the things that we are in the midst of history. Obviously, the changes that have come down over the last couple of years from executive orders and then, we're watching, lawsuits go back and forth and things like that. Um, you know, it is there's a it is strange and difficult to live while history is being made. And I wonder, like as you think about either how an institution should run or how we should be working as professionals, this is a difficult question. But like what anchors you, or how are you thinking about how you get through, a time when it sure seems like parts of this country are trying to roll back things that we thought we had already dealt with. And then clearly they haven't. And I'll give you a little bit more time. To think about that answer by talking about one of my mentors and sponsors, a woman named Wanda Lipscomb, who uh, is the Associate Dean for Student Affairs, where I was before. She was raised in Richmond, Virginia, and she'd be quick to tell you that it was, the capital of the Confederacy. She was raised in the segregated South, probably not too far from where her family, were enslaved. Um, uh, but that she remembered, going down the street to their lawyer and their doctor and their, who were, she very much, remember, thought that her relationship with, African or Black American professionals was important to who she eventually became as a PhD psychologist. Um, and I think that has been one of her anchors through all of this. I mean, I think that that she's been through, witnessed some of this before, but that the things that were important before are important again. So how do you, if you feel like it, what anchors do you think we should be hanging on to, as we watch what's happening in our country now?
I'll just start. The first thing I'll say, and for sure I can only speak for myself. I am not going to speak
Yep.
for everyone. But I will say that not much of this is shocking. This is not,
Mhm.
it's just pretty much just put more on a broadcast as opposed to maybe, I don't think a lot of the way that people feel about certain demographics has ever changed. I just think that they're saying it out loud now. We've
Mhm.
always had systemic um, ways of keeping people back over the generations, and they're just making more laws to make sure that they stick. Okay, and so you know, it is sort of like, yeah, okay, well, we already kind of knew you thought that way. You're just saying it on
Mhm.
TV now, And so I think that there's a level of resilience that many people we've had to overcome anyway. I do think that what is being shown to people who aren't from marginalized communities are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people think that way because they might not have just been around people that, like I do still think it's a small population of people that are just very loud and have these opinions. I think the majority of people have come together. We are a very diverse country now. To be honest, a lot of mixed race now. A lot people are
Mhm.
marrying mixed race. I mean, so that it has really uh, it this marginalization, I think, is something that is not new. I think that that minority of people that feel that way are just more vocal about it. I think the level of resilience has always been there because there are always microaggressions that happen every day for most people. And, we have always had to kind of navigate around it and still function, whether it's in the workplace or at schools or whatever the case might be. And that's why, um, as Cayla had mentioned earlier, Rosalind Franklin really is that place where you feel that this is a place that you could feel safe at, and I don't think that you feel that way at a lot of different institutions. And so, but I do think that it's not shocking. It's just said out loud. If that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I completely get it. Yeah.
And I want to echo what Dr. Darey did say. It's not shocking. It's not surprising. I guess I'm of an age in which I've experienced these things before as well. We didn't have social media,
Yeah.
but there were other ways of hearing things. But one of the things Dr. Darey said before about the church, you finding strength in the church. And one thing I always remember in the church, they said it was, "This too shall pass." And I always keep that in mind. And so that carries me on.
Well, certainly much of this is not new, right? I mean, Cayla, Quentin, Naomi, any thoughts about it?
As far as anchoring goes, I think the biggest thing is we're seeing changes in healthcare, we're seeing changes in America. And that's helped me a lot as things are going on because it's like, yeah, for every bad thing you hear about on the news, there are clinicians speaking out against the bills and laws that are coming out. There are universities speaking out. And that's a big thing because it's not enough in this day and age to be upset about something. You need to speak on it, you need to act on it. Um, because as much as we say, like, oh my gosh, this is shocking, I'm scared, I don't like these times, that's great. But if you're not supporting your fellow clinicians or the Black people around you and you're not actively doing something, it is more so just wordplay. And it can be appreciated, but there's no action to it. So as we were saying earlier, like Rosalind's doing a very good job of actually putting the actions behind the words. So that has definitely helped me a lot, just seeing that there are institutions that are making sure that you are creating clinicians that are going to be competent no matter what culture or community they're dealing with.
Great.
I would agree with Cayla. I would say there's nothing new under the sun. And so just as racism is old, so are people who will resist and who will make changes that are necessary. If it's been done before, it can be done again. And as long as there are people who still care, there will be people to resist and make the changes and push back. So I think that gives me hope as well, is that if people before me were able to do it, then I can do it too, even if it's in a small way or a big way. Whatever means I need to do, I'll resist as well.
Yeah, and just to echo what everybody else has been saying about like resiliency, I feel like if our people could get through slavery and get through discrimination and the Jim Crow and all of that, then the stuff that's happening now is like we can get through anything if we can get through all of that. So we're very resilient people, and like Dr. Williams said, it'll pass and it'll be something else after.
Great. So Pamela Chambers we have a couple of, no questions, but a couple of comments. Pamela Chambers, it's important to understand Black history reflects a varied diaspora, since the culture in Nigeria is surely different from Brazilian or Jamaican history or African American culture. Even in the US, Black experience is extremely different depending on who you are speaking to. Aside from the general discrimination based solely on the color of our skin, here in the US, even discrimination varies based on the shade of our skin. So that is a big thing for non-Blacks to understand. And then Dr. Cook's unknown history. The American Nurses Association has existed since 1916. However, it wasn't until 1965 that Black nurses were admitted to the organization. In 2020, the organization formally apologized to the National Black Nurses Association. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. Any last thing? And then let's see here. Any last things that you want to either you didn't get a chance to say or you want to remind us of? We're going to end with Eric so he can remind us about the rest of the events of Black History Month. But any of the rest of you, any last thoughts or something that you thought, oh, I really wish, or even just something you're excited about, even if it's board prep?
I do want to say the physician assistant program is hosting a book drive for Black History Month. So if anybody has any books that they are willing to donate, the box will remain outside of our classroom until the end of the month.
So I want to, before we move on to one of the somebody else, George Ratton, who's in our institutional advancement, wrote to comment about Teddy Clark, who was a 1950 grad, I think, of the Scholl School. So that he had never stopped learning or giving back. He was an African American man who was enthusiastic, approachable, generous, and a great speaker, and faced tremendous obstacles starting his career as in minority by race and profession in the segregated societies of the 1950s. And that our graduates continue to make a great difference. So thank you, George. Other things that you all are excited about or want us to remember? Each
Well, I
of
just
you.
want to mention
Yeah.
just remind people of what we talked about earlier about the Black History Month
Mm-hmm.
showcase featuring Dr. Darey as the keynote speaker. But I also want to remind people there's actually an African American museum in Waukegan as well, the England Manor. Okay, and so they have it's a house, and that they have the Black History display, both national and local, as
Cool.
well. So that's a good place to visit. Yeah, you have to call to make let them know that you are coming, but it is a good place to visit.
Great.
So another fact that I read about recently was about the paramedics, and I read that they were started in Pittsburgh by Black people. So that's
Yeah,
healthcare related. So I
yeah,
didn't know that. That was interesting. And
it is.
yeah, and I had a question for Cayla. What HBCU did you go to?
Xavier of Louisiana, the only Catholic
Okay,
HBCU in the US.
I
okay. I
visited
went.
there. I
I would have
visited
to
there.
concur. I'm an
Yeah.
ex-U.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh, hello,
yeah.
Fayetteville. Hello, Xavier Wright. Yes, I loved Xula.
I went to Jackson State University.
Okay.
Amazing.
All right.
I think that Xavier is starting a medical school.
Yeah, they
Um,
are.
we
Hmm.
had, when I was at Michigan State, we started in a sort of pathway program, a early assurance program with Xavier of Louisiana. And
So, fun fact about Xavier, despite being one of the smaller HBCUs, they are actually the top at putting Black people into the medical field
Medical
for
school.
the past
yeah,
2 years.
Hmm.
yeah, I got to talk to their chemistry club, which is the largest club on campus.
Hmm.
Yes.
I was
How
in the
often is that
chemistry club.
were you? Yeah. How often is that the case anywhere? Yeah,
Anywhere.
anywhere.
I do have a question about Xavier. Is it the only HBCU that's also a Catholic institute?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. I can't remember the name. It's one of Drexel's daughters, right? I think
Yes.
was the
Catherine.
Catherine.
founder.
Catherine
Catherine.
Drexel. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
The thing
Hmm.
about HBCUs, they know their history. That's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank Eric Williams, Kim Darey, Naomi Popoolapade, Pade. I will do it again. Um, Popoolapade, uh, Cayla Adams, and Quentin Conkle for being with me today. Thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts and some history, and thank you for all you're doing to help RFU, particularly with Black History Month, but in general. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Thank you for all you do to support our faculty, our staff, and our students. It is the work of people like you that make the university such a special place to be. It is Friday. I hope you get to have a weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.